So for the purposes of your late morning entertainment, I am Bjorn from Verizon. So you can blame everything on him. So let's get into what MODRNA is. So it's Mobile Operator Discovery, Registration, and Authentication. So the first 3 months of the working group were coming up with the acronym. So the idea is to develop a profile of OpenID Connect for mobile network operators who call themselves MNO because they love nothing more than acronyms, as evidenced by the first 3 months of activity coming up with an acronym for the name. This is not, a lot of people think about this as, oh, this is a profile for running a native app on a phone. No. That may be one of the things that people do with this, but this is a profile for the actual identity providers so that when we have 850 mobile network operators around the world and relying parties that may actually need to talk to all 850 mobile network operators, there's a common interface across all of the operators. Everybody has a common understanding of what authentication context is, how discovery works, etc. We don't want 850 slightly different variations of OpenID Connect to be instantiated around the world. That would drive relying parties crazy and really hurt adoption. So Mobile Connect is a Mobile Connect TM is a trademark of the GSMA, which is the organization that the sort of large wireless operators belong to. So there's two things. They divide the world up into two spaces. There's the guys that actually own radio towers, who are mobile network operators, and there's MVNOs, which are things like Virgin Telecom and those guys who basically provide services over top of other people's networks. So the GSMA doesn't allow the MVNOs to be members. And they don't participate in Mobile Connect. So that's the reason why there's only 850, because we're not counting the virtual ones. But we all want that. The idea behind having an open standard is that the virtual ones can adopt, even though they're not part of the GSMA, they can still adopt a conformance standard without worrying about the GSMA suing them. But that may not be the way that the GSMA's marketing puts it, but that's at least my interpretation and from the conversations I've had with them. The GSMA actually has about 150 people working full-time on Mobile Connect, working with the carriers around the world. Currently, there are about, I think it's 2.8 billion accounts that have Mobile Connect availability on them. Not 2.8 billion people using Mobile Connect at the moment, but 2.8 billion with a B. And I believe that's the American billion, not the European billion, with that enabled. India is the largest single deployment of Mobile Connect. Everybody in India with a handy has the ability to do OpenID Connect authentications now. So that's been fully rolled out in India by the mobile network operators. So we have in the working group, it's both network operators and some people from the community. So this is the list of working group members. John Bradley and Torsten Moderstedt from DT are the co-chairs, and John Bradley is, of course, a total windbag and uses his loud voice to make the GSMA Mobile Connect people to conform to standards as opposed to wandering off in their own direction as carriers are wont to do. And sometimes he has to use his really, really loud voice. So the things that are important about Mobile Connect are that we're looking at using the mobile phone number as an identifier for the user as far as doing discovery, allowing them to log in. Now, there's more than just Mobile Connect where that's actually becoming important in OpenID Connect. Google, you can now use your phone number as your identifier. A lot of countries, once we get out of the sort of bubble of North America and some of the first world people who imagine themselves to be first world countries, a lot of people don't have any idea what an email address is. You know, people, I think of their, you know, they're used to using SMS messaging. They think of themselves as their phone number. That's the identifier that they use. Even traditional operators are moving to phone numbers as identifiers. So we've been working on that in Connect to make that work well. We've also been working with the account chooser group to allow phone numbers as a first-class citizen in account chooser. The other thing that's important, especially to the operators for some reason, is that they kind of like the idea of the phone being used as the authenticator, which, given that pretty much everybody who has an account with a phone company, a mobile network operator, has a phone, it kind of makes sense to use the out-of-band signaling of the phone to be able to use that as the authenticator, and be able to use the phone to replace passwords and other hardware security tokens, or at least complement them. You know, it's probably a matter of perspective whether or not you think of the phone as a hardware security token or not, but you know, at least in their marketing, they want to differentiate RSA key fobs and things that are phishable from what the Mobile Connect product is doing. So the general flow here is that the user uses account chooser or clicks on a button, Mobile Connect branded button, to start an authentication. So you may be starting your authentication from a laptop, desktop, tablet, what have you, goes to the service provider or relying party, however you want to term them. So that then causes you to do discovery. So the GSMA has a service called API Exchange, which can basically look up who your operator is from your phone number. That's not something that a relying party can do on their own. For privacy reasons, we don't want relying parties to ask people for their phone numbers as a prerequisite for being able to log in. You ought to be able to log in with your handy without disclosing your phone number using this. So telling the relying party what your phone number is not a prerequisite to using Mobile Connect. The phone number the user may allow the phone number to go to the relying party as an attribute, but it isn't the subject or the primary authenticator. So the discovery goes to the API Exchange, which is the GSMA service at the moment, and they send back an encrypted blob and who the operator is, which then is used for the service provider to then make a request to the network operator. They talk to a OpenID Connect gateway using standard OpenID Connect flow. That then causes a back-channel authentication, either using a SIM applet on the SIM, USSD, which is something that probably North Americans may never have seen, but it's a common way that feature phones and other types of phones, it works on Android and iOS, etc. But it's not a common thing. So there is a USSD profile which talks to the SIM, SMS, smartphone app. They've been working with FIDO for being able to use UAF authenticators for biometrics, etc., as part of the authentication. So that all happens in the back channel. So it doesn't take, so all of this can happen without the user switching context at the relying party. And there's messaging that can happen in this back channel around you're logging in here. There's extensions that we're working on with the GSMA around being able to collect additional kinds of consent. Do you want to transfer $10,000? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? So there's using the back channel creates an interesting value add uplift that the mobile operators can provide to the various websites that want to do it. Being able to collect consent dynamically and perhaps even do qualified digital signatures in the background is where those value-added services are where they're going to make their money. In Mobile Connect, the basic authentication service is going to be free to all the relying parties, is at least the goal at this point. If you want enhanced authentication beyond the basic anti-phishing authentication, you want to make sure that a biometric is collected, then as a relying party you may have to pay more to get some of those features. So banks and other people who aren't going to be able to use SMS, your class 3 low security SMS in the future, which is happening in Europe first, et cetera, will be able to subscribe to a higher security identity service from the phone companies so that they won't lose the revenue that they were getting from SMSs in the network by providing an actual identity service versus just charging for the SMSs. So they're moving up the stack from what they were doing and providing additional value. The parts that the MODRNA working group is working on is around MNO discovery. We're trying to standardize that in a way that you don't necessarily need to use the GSMA provided API exchange. We're standardizing what those discovery tokens and that protocol looks like. And the various parts of doing the authentication request around the standard versions of profiling OpenID Connect for what the authentication contexts are, authentication methods, how you pass the encrypted user hint in, et cetera. So those are the sort of 3 areas that we're working on. We have a new task. We had a meeting about a month ago with the GSMA. Now we're now working with them on a standard for being able to port accounts from one mobile network operator to another, so that if you go and use your handy to be able to authenticate to a given relying party, and you port your phone number from one provider to another, which people do on a fairly frequent basis. You don't need to go and rebind a new account, that your Mobile Connect authentication can move from one provider to another. And we're trying to do that in a way that will also work for parting accounts from email-based providers, between email-based providers, from email to phone and phone to email. So we want to make that a generic, how do I move from one provider to another standard? So we did that with OpenID 2 to OpenID Connect. Now we're trying to develop we're going to try and develop a standard that everyone can implement, not just the mobile network operators, where somebody can move their account, port it from one provider to another. That's not something that we currently have in OpenID Connect. So again, we have our various specifications we've been working on: discovery, client registration. So we're using software, at least the MODRNA work group has recommended using software statements and dynamic client registration, our signature algorithms, et cetera, for being able to register these clients. The idea is that, as a relying party, what you'll do is go to a central registration authority, maybe the GSMA, be able to register yourself, agree to the various terms of service, say that you adhere to whatever replaces European Safe Harbor, et cetera, so that the phone companies you've attested someplace that you're a good relying party. They then give you a signed JOT, which you then take around to register with individual, it will be accepted at all 850 mobile network operators for going and getting individual client IDs, what have you. So you don't have to go and manually do 850 registration steps. And again, for the authentication draft, dealing with the additional parameters, ACR parameters, and some of the stuff around how we're doing the back channel consent collection. So you can kind of think of this as an onion, where we have OpenID Connect that builds on top of OAuth 2. We have the MODRNA spec, which from the OpenID Foundation Working Group, which defines a bunch of constraints, and then we have the Mobile Connect Profile from the GSMA that defines other things that we're not directly involved in: billing, marketing, some other enhancements. Then there's also the GSMA is providing developer portals and other tools for people to be able to use this. So like I say, this is a big effort. 2.8 billion identities, 140 people working on it full time, and me attempting to ride herd on the back of the alligator. So our current status is that there's a Mobile Connect profile that the GSMA has people implementing that incorporates the MODRNA authentication spec targeted for release 2. We're trying to address the issues of around account portability and reinforce the OpenID Connect concept of scoped identity. So in OpenID Connect, all subjects are scoped to the issuer, which should be fairly obvious. That's the way it is supposed to work in SAML, though some people have on occasion got that slightly wrong. If you read my blog, you will know the history of that. But in SAML, in OpenID Connect, it's very important to check that the subject is actually treated in combination with the issuer. Otherwise, somebody who isn't the issuer issues the same subject, and by golly, they've taken over the account. So that's one of the things that's really important to check in OpenID implementations. The GSMA was slightly less clear on that because they like the notion of, well, we'll have global subjects, but again, if you actually do that, you get relying parties to be lax. Some of them are going to also be taking external identities, etc. So we're re-emphasizing to all the Mobile Connect relying parties that you have to use scoped identities, because we did discover that that was something that people were being unfortunately lax about. Moving towards the OpenID Connect dynamic configuration or dynamic registration over the current system, which essentially every authentication has to go through one API exchange at the moment, and that isn't going to scale, and the GSMA has recognized that. They kind of like the idea of being in control more than perhaps the mobile network operators like the idea of them being in control of every authentication. So that moves to a more decentralized mechanism, and more than one. There could be one issuer of software statements from the GSMA and perhaps one for MVNOs or somebody else that relying parties trust. Yeah. So again, the various things. We're also, part of this is also extending the back channel authorization for situations where you may not be doing authentication, but just want to collect authorization. So you may have logged in with some mechanism into your bank, but your bank knows that you have a MODRNA account, and they may just be using that for collecting authorizations from you in the back channel. So there's going to be some extensions, which hopefully will flow back into general OpenID Connect that we're trying to keep on top of. And that's pretty much it for MODRNA. So how much time do I have? Oh, I actually have a long time for questions. So we can do MODRNA questions and anything else you want to ask Bjorn about. Questions? Here, why don't you take the microphone around so that the recording. We have somebody up in the front here.
So how would this work if I have multiple phone numbers attached to a device, Google Voice number or the traditional phone number, etc.?
If you have, well, you would go to, on your laptop, you would go to a relying party. You would say you want to do Mobile Connect, log in. They would redirect you to the discovery service, and you would provide the phone number that you wanted to actually do the authentication on. So on the mobile device itself, that can be pre-populated with the number of the device that you happen to be using. Again, there's different opinions about that. I think that people ought to be able to choose which phone number if they have multiple phone numbers associated. Other people have the opinion that, well, if they're on a device that can do Mobile Connect, you probably just ought to use that device. So there may be some slight implementation differences between how the carriers do the mapping of service accounts and phone numbers together, because there are different data models that the different phone companies have, whether or not you have a single service account with multiple phone numbers or they're all individual. So there will be some small differences or large differences between the way that different mobile network operators operate, but in principle, you ought to be able to choose which phone number you want to have your authentication come to.
Any chance you can pick which IDP you want to use, or is that out of your control as a phone holder?
the IDP is the mobile network operator for the phone number that you use, so
No getting out away from that.
you would provide, if you have if the relying party supports account chooser, you would get a pick list of all of the different IDPs that you provision into that user agent, and you can choose one of your phone numbers or Google or Facebook or some other provider. So depending upon, the marketing people at the GSMA really like the idea of getting people to click on a GSMA Mobile Connect branded button, and we're trying to dissuade them from that we don't want to, in people's minds, think of Mobile Connect as being completely separate from OpenID Connect. Mobile Connect is just one of the, perhaps a large subset of the OpenID Connect providers, but as a relying party, you really want to address the largest amount of the market as you can. So allowing people to choose whichever account they want to log into makes sense. But different, a bank may have a different view of what kind of OpenID Connect accounts they actually want to have log in versus that. So we've seen in Switzerland and some of the Scandinavian countries where a lot of the countries sort of roll out all of the operators at the same time so that you have geographic coverage. So as a bank operator, you would go, as a bank relying party, you would go to all the, be able to sign up with one of the mobile network operators in your country and be able to, may just say everybody has to use Mobile Connect to log into their accounts or something like that. So different relying parties are going to have slightly different views of it, but hopefully in the broad social network case, people will be able to choose any kind of OpenID Connect account, whether it's Mobile Connect or some other social network provider.
John mentioned that
or enterprise providers.
account chooser option, and that will be the topic of Pam Dingle's presentation this afternoon.
So one of the problems I see with the telcos being the IDPs is the subscriber is often like a corporation, right? Like for corporate phones, or in my case, I pay for 5 phones for my family, right? So how would my daughter's identity attributes be shared? Right?
Again, that depends to some extent on how the mobile network operator actually maps their service accounts to phone numbers, et cetera. So they're going to have to, each operator is going to have to sort of sort that out. Initially, the only attribute that's being shared is the phone number. Now, as options, what the name is and all of that will optionally be the OpenID Connect user profile information can be shared, but each operator is going to have to figure out how the service accounts and subservice accounts actually map to the phone numbers, because probably the subservice accounts that you have for your additional phone numbers for your family all have your name on them at the moment. So each operator is going to have to sort that out at the back end. That's sort of a bit separate from the on-the-wire authentication protocol, but I'm sure that they will sort that out. We have, DT has that kind of complicated service account mechanism, and they've been putting a lot of thought, and will be providing guidance to other operators.
Yeah, on a similar topic, it feels that the more you use the phone as an authentication device, some use cases would require a strong registration procedure. Is the spec going into that topic at all? How strong was the registration? How strong was the identity proofing prior to you getting that phone line, that device?
So the spec is going into how strong is the authentication method at the moment. There is an additional level of assurance which states that the person has been proofed to European e-signature regulations. So right now we have 2 levels, one which is pseudonymous. We're saying that it is the same person as arrived last time to some degree of credential strength, and the other one is the person has come in person, provided their passport, and done all of the things that they would otherwise have been required to get a qualified digital certificate that essentially the mobile network operator can proxy for them. So there may be additional steps in the future, but initially that's how Mobile Connect is rolling out. So people ought not to imagine that identity proofing has happened on these pseudonymous accounts. Now it may have, but it could just be a burner SIM. So what you know is that the person perhaps authenticated with the same biometric on their, with the same SIM that they came in last time, which is highly valuable, but not necessarily something that you want to trust the attributes to say, yes, this is the same person with the same national ID number for doing the mapping of the account.
Good. Thank you.
How are the mobile operators monetizing this?
They're planning on monetizing it through the value-added services, the charging extra for, so doing an authentication at essentially LOA 2 with a proof of presence confirmation, a swipe, etc., will be free. If you want to have the person unlock the phone with a biometric or a PIN, then that would be an additional uplift. If you want to be able to make use of the back channel messaging service to collect user consent, do you want to make this purchase? Do you want to transfer this money, etc.? Those will be additional uplifts. But the basic, strong-ish authentication is intended to be free at sort of. That's the initial buy-in to get market penetration, and then they're looking at providing the uplift services.
So it's transactional, not subscription?
Again, that may be dependent on the individual operator. So at the moment, the uplift services are being negotiated sort of directly between the relying parties and the operators.
And who is the current target market on the relying parties? Who are they going after?
Depends
where's the sweet spot for those?
Depends on what jurisdiction we're talking about. I believe in India it's in e-commerce, some of the e-commerce sites that are doing this first. In Europe, they're mostly going after banks. They're also going after, so in France, there's an OpenID Connect service called France Connect run by the French government, and surprisingly enough, they have a deal with Orange and the other French mobile network operators for providing strong security, pseudonymous authentication to the French government's EID online service. So it's, government EID, banks, and e-commerce are sort of depends on the jurisdiction. Each country sort of has its own niche where they're getting started.
So this morning what we did real quickly was to talk about OpenID Connect, which we think is the identity standard of choice, or at least a building block in the stack for identity going forward. Thanks to Jim and Pam, we established that baseline. Mike then talked about the certification program and how that importantly fits into the work that you're doing, not only with relying parties, but also with your colleagues in this broader notion of trust. John then talked about the platform of choice for OpenID Connect from a profile point of view. This afternoon we'll be doing two more important pieces of work. John mentioned very briefly account chooser, which has implications for those of you that want to have that sign-on experience, a set of alternatives there. And then after that, we have an exciting announcement about a financial API working group, a new working group that we're spinning up in the fintech area. So those are the two presentations this afternoon. I wanted to thank you for your time and attention here, and certainly all of us are available for any particular questions that you have. Have a great conference and see you this afternoon.